Well, the Blue Jackets lost, which is a surprise to exactly no one. But it's fine. It's fine. We can all collectively calm down. Let's unpack that loss on today's Locked On Blue Jackets.
You're Locked On Blue Jackets, your daily podcast on the Columbus Blue Jackets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hello, welcome to Locked On Blue Jackets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I am, as always, your host, Jay Foster, here to give you the good, the bad, and the ugly about your favorite team, and mine, the Columbus Blue Jackets. Before we get things started, I want to thank everyone for making this your first listen of the day every single day. Locked On Blue Jackets is free and available on all podcast platforms and over on YouTube. I also have to let you know that today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Download the app now by visiting FanDuel.com and win $300 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. I don't know anyone who was surprised at the fact that the Blue Jackets lost this game. As soon as they released the Blue Jackets roster, I was like, oh, it's game over now, right? And like that's maybe a little bit flippant, but here's the thing about preseason, right? The big boys don't travel. The big boys, the main roster for the most part, will stay at home. They will play the home games. It happens every year and it happens with every team, right? Like Sidney Crosby doesn't travel. He plays home Penguins preseason games. Alex Ovechkin plays all of the Caps home games and doesn't travel during the preseason. Like it's just kind of how it works, right? Like you see the veterans at home because they don't want to travel, and also probably because it sells more tickets if you've got Adam Fantilli playing that 1C spot than if you have Isaac Lundestrom playing the 1C spot, right? So what happens there is you get this mismatch in rosters, right? Because the big boys are playing the home game, which means that a lot of the roster, not all of it, but a decent amount of the roster for the Sabres in last night's game was in fact just their regular roster, right? Tage Thompson was playing, Rasmus Dahlin was playing, Zach Benson was playing, like three of their better players. There were some guys that weren't there. I know Owen Power played the night before in Columbus because, again, I still don't know what the veteran rule is in the preseason off the top of my head, but you have to have a certain number of veterans, by which I mean you have to have a certain number of players that have played X amount of games. I don't know whether that's, you have to have a certain, you have to have 6 or 8 players that have played at least 200 NHL games is the rule, something like that. So, you're still going to have some guys, but the Sabres had, Tage Thompson, who ended up scoring the first goal for the Sabres. They had Rasmus Dahlin, I've just mentioned. The Blue Jackets' big guns were Zach Aston-Reese and Jake Christiansen, right? And no disrespect to those guys, but they are not the same caliber of player as Rasmus Dahlin, for example, So, frankly, I'm kind of surprised that the score was as even as it was. The Sabres won 2-1. Blue Jackets were leading 1-0 for what I think until about the near the end of the second period. I think mostly it was the goaltending that kept them in it. Ivan Fedotov was excellent again, and it's preseason. We are going to have a conversation. We're going to have the start of that conversation in a second here about goaltending for this team, right? But Ivan Fedotov kept them in it. Miles Wood scored a goal, obviously. Who else would score a goal? And it was looking promising. But I at no point was like, oh yeah, they're absolutely going to win this game, right? Like it just they kept up for the most part. They were not badly outplayed, but I think it's fair to say the Sabres definitely had the edge in basically every metric. Miles Wood did the power play goal as well. Actually, I didn't mention, which is nice. I think that's their first man advantage goal of the preseason. I don't believe they allowed a goal on the penalty kill either. So, special teams get a thumbs up. But lots of very young players and AHL guys in the roster tonight, which is not a bad thing, right? I feel like we've seen a lot of Charlie Alec which makes me think that he's probably going to be one of the next cuts. And there were a couple of cuts earlier today, earlier today as of recording this, Tuesday morning, I believe there was some cuts. 4 players got cut. We'll talk about that in a second as well. But we're at that point now where you've given these guys their customary half a game if you're a goalie, or the full game if you're a camp invite, if you're getting sent back to junior. Like, we're getting to that point, right? So I'm not surprised that I feel like we've seen a lot of Charlie Alec. That might be recency bias. Obviously, we spent a lot of time watching him at the prospect tournament and then come into preseason. But it was a roster of very young guys, or it was someone like Brendan Gaunce, who I like Brendan Gaunce's game a lot. I thought he did quietly a very good job of just doing Brendan Gaunce things, right? He's not flashy, he's not dramatic, he's not the most skilled guy in the world. He plays a very simple, I'm going to take the puck and I'm going to skate it up the ice, and if I get a shot on goal, I get a shot on goal type game, right? Which sometimes you need a guy like that, and I thought he was good in this game. I thought he's been good. I think this is his second preseason game, so I've liked him in both games that I've seen him in. But to get back to my original point, you've got either you guys like Alec, who are 5 minutes old, or you've got your quote-unquote grizzled AHL veterans like Brendan Gaunce, right? And you've got some in-between. You've got a handful of in-between guys, but for the most part, that's what was on the roster. So very, very unsurprised that the result was a loss. I am surprised that the Blue Jackets kept it so close. Realistically, it was close for one reason, and that was goaltending. So we're going to take a quick break, and when we get back, I want to talk about Ivan Fedotov and how he just keeps continuing to impress, even though, again, caveat 1, it's preseason. Caveat 2, very small sample size, but he is looking extremely promising for a couple of reasons, and also not promising for another reason. So I'm going to get into my thoughts on Ivan Fedotov so far in this preseason in just a second here on Locked On Blue Jackets. First, I'm going to tell you about FanDuel. The NFL season is here, and FanDuel is making sure you're ready for kickoff with a can't-miss offer. Right now, new customers can bet just $5, and if your bet wins, you're going to get $300 in bonus bets to use across the app. I love using FanDuel. It fits how I like to bet, which is building an insane same-game parlay of, like, this guy's going to get a touchdown, and this guy's going to get a touchdown, and this guy's going to get a touchdown, and they're 3 completely different guys on different teams and different levels. But if I win, then I get approximately $1 bajillion. But if you want to play a little bit safer, a little bit less of an insane way to do sports betting, they have player props, or just, a normal same-game parlay of the Blue Jackets will win and Kirill Marchenko will score a goal and Zach Werenski will have 3 shots on goal. A normal same-game parlay. But you can do basically anything you want on FanDuel. You can even jump in live as the action unfolds. Makes every game way more exciting, and it's the best way to add a little more energy to those game day Sundays. So, are you ready to play? Download the FanDuel app now by visiting FanDuel.com to get started. That's FanDuel.com to place your first $5 bet. Welcome back to Locked On Blue Jackets. Let's go ahead and talk about Ivan Fedotov, who we've talked about, I wouldn't say at length, but he impressed me in his first preseason game. He made, I believe, 14 of 15 saves in the first 40 minutes of the game, replaced by Evan Gardner, who also played very well. On Monday night, Jet Greaves was excellent, 23 of 24 saves, and Elvis made 8 out of 10 saves, so a little bit less stellar. And then tonight, Ivan Fedotov comes in again, plays the first 40 minutes. Zach Sorchenko gets the last 20. And makes, I believe, 24 of 25 saves for Fedotov through 40 minutes. So, like, on the one hand, that's too many shots to face in 40 minutes. And, again, unsurprising based on the roster, but I do think the Blue Jackets are allowing too many shots, which that's been true forever, right? But Ivan Fedotov has made the saves that he's needed to make, right? Like, again, 1 goal allowed in in tonight's game, 1 goal allowed in Sunday's game, so 2 goals through 80 minutes, which I believe is a goals against average of 1.5 goals a game, if I'm doing the math right on that. Basically, on pace for allowing 3 goals over 2 full games ish. He has a really it's not a strange style of goaltending. It's exactly the kind of style of goaltending that I expect from someone who's 6'7" and hasn't played a ton of NHL hockey over the past couple of years. He's a little bit unorthodox. He is not the most technically sound goalie I've ever seen, and I don't know if this is, again, on the back of watching Jet Greaves specifically on Monday night, who is a very technically sound goalie and is very kind of calm and in control and positional, which you have to be when you're, 6 foot on skates. But Ivan Fedotov, I think, is 6'7", and a lot of times the puck just hits him as opposed to him making a deliberate save, which is not a bad thing necessarily, right? Like 90% of goaltending is positioning. And then, you want an extra maybe 1 or 2% of your saves to be through, athleticism or luck or, just that insane, I'm going to throw my hand out and hope that the puck hits my glove type saves, right? It feels like that 1 to 2% is much higher for Fedotov. He makes the saves, sure. And again, he's played very well. He doesn't inspire calmness in net. He doesn't inspire my having low blood pressure. Watching him play, he is very. I called him flaily on Twitter, and I stand by that. A lot of his saves look very impressive, but it is just kind of a mix of athleticism and desperation, which again works for some goalies, right? I don't know how sustainable this is, and I'm not sitting here saying that Fedotov is going to overtake Elvis in the goalie depth charts, but I also think that there's not a 0% chance of that happening, right? There is a higher than 0% chance, not very high, but higher than 0. Because at the end of the day, it doesn't matter how you're making the saves; it matters that you're making them, right? And Elvis, again, small sample size. We're not going to jump to any conclusions, even though this is the Jumping to Conclusions podcast. Fedotov has made the saves that he's needed to make, right? He was very good on Sunday night. He was very good again last night. I imagine that the goalie coach probably is a little bit stressed out watching him play because it doesn't look like it's not the prettiest style of goaltending, and it's not, again, like the most technically sound style of goaltending, but it appears to be working for him. I would love to see him be a little bit tighter, a little bit more controlled. But again, I also understand that the dude is 6'7" and he just has a lot of limb, right? I think that's partially the difference between him and Jet Greaves, right? To use Greaves as the kind of the mirror to Fedotov here. Jet Greaves is small for a goalie, small for a hockey player in general, honestly, but especially small for a goalie, smaller than you would like a goalie to be. And I was talking, I don't remember how long ago this was, the last season sometime, I think I had Greg Ballack on, who is a goalie scout, goalie expert, and he was like, yeah, the ideal height for a goalie is 6'2", is between 6'2" and 6'4", closer to 6'4". You're tall enough to fill the net, but you're not so tall that your limbs are so long that you basically just create a bunch of holes when you go into butterfly. Which is the problem with taller goalies, right? Is that their limbs are so much longer. The 5-hole is bigger. It takes them longer to get into butterfly. There's more holes all over the place, right? They take up more of the net, but they also give up a lot more of the net than a smaller goalie. So Jet Greaves is smaller than you want your goalie to be. Fedotov is taller than you want your goalie to be, and they both come at that from very different directions, obviously. But Jet compensates for the lack of height by being very technically sound and being very, positional. And Fedotov compensates for the extra height by, again, just kind of that Jonathan. I always call it cat with a laser pointer style goaltending, and if it's done right, it's very, very effective. I think Marc-Andre Fleury is another really great example of a goalie that was maybe not the most technically sound, but had this incredible athleticism that allowed him to make these saves, and I'm not comparing Fedotov to Marc-Andre Fleury before people get mad about that, but it's a style of goaltending, and it seems to be working for him. The problem is I don't know how sustainable the style of goaltending is. It could be that he has adapted to the systems better. I don't know that the Flyers were the most defensively robust team in the league, and the Blue Jackets are also not the most defensively robust team in the league. But I will say that for Fedotov to play this well with essentially an AHL squad and Jake Christiansen in front of him, um, I'm willing to give him the benefit of the doubt on this one. I thought he was very, very good tonight. I thought Sorchenko was also very good. Saw fewer shots, played fewer minutes, also gave up a goal. But you're looking at Fedotov to be your AHL starter. Your number 3 goalie in the pipeline. Sorchenko is your AHL backup. He's gonna get maybe 30 AHL games. More if and when Fedotov gets called up to deal with, the inevitable injury, fatigue, etc. that Elvis suffers from. But you expect a guy like Fedotov to play better than a guy like Sorchenko, right? So I'm not going to say, I'm not saying that it's unexpected that he played better than Sorchenko. It is, in fact, extremely expected. So for the most part, I've been very impressed with the goaltending thus far in preseason. Elvis aside, and we'll get into Elvis. I'm sure that he will. I assume he's playing tomorrow against Pittsburgh. My guess is it'll be one of Elvis or Jet, and then probably Nolan Lalonde will play tomorrow. I don't know what combination. My guess is we'll see Elvis tomorrow based on just kind of a gut feeling, really. So maybe he'll make up for his poor performance in his first preseason game. But as of right now, if we were treating the goalie situation as a race, he is in 3rd place behind Jet and Fedotov. Obviously, preseason counts for exactly nothing. So, what counts is when the points started going on the board. But Elvis needed to have a strong training camp and a strong preseason, and he's kind of starting on the back foot, I feel like. So, again, I want to preface this by saying that I don't think that Fedotov is going to steal Elvis's job. I think that this season, the goalies are going to be Jet and Elvis. I don't think Fedotov is going to come in and supplant that. But I do think that might be a more difficult decision for the coaches to make than we originally thought when Fedotov was acquired. But overall, like I said, goaltending, very happy with it at the minute for the most part, which obviously that can change fast. But I have enjoyed almost all of the goaltending performances we've seen this preseason, which is unexpected and pleasant. I'm going to take another quick break, and then there's been some camp cuts. None of which are a surprise, but we'll run through them real quick and then talk about who is likely to be the next round of cuts. So we'll do that in just a second here on Locked On Blue Jackets. Welcome back to Locked On Blue Jackets. The Blue Jackets sent some guys back to their CHL teams or released them from their contract. There were some camp cuts yesterday. And again, none of them surprising in basically any way, shape, or form. They released Nicholas Seamer and Marcus Kersey from their tryouts, or I don't know if it was even a tryout or if they were just invited to camp. But they were both released, and Evan Gardner and Owen Griffin were both sent back to their respective CHL clubs. So Evan Gardner back to Saskatoon, and Owen Griffin back to the Oshawa Generals, I believe. I blanked on where he was for a second. Yeah, Oshawa. None of this is surprising, right? Owen Griffin was literally just drafted. Evan Gardner played he got his 20 minutes of preseason hockey again, played well in that 20 minutes of preseason, but I'm sure that the best place for him to be right now is in the WHL, playing games with the Saskatoon Blades instead of hanging around training camp, maybe getting another 20 minutes of game action, right? They want him playing, and they want him playing like a lot. So best place for him. Owen Griffin impressed. I thought he kept up admirably at the prospect tournament. Obviously, when Jordan DeMay went down with that injury in the third game, he stepped up and played on that top line with Keskinen and Pinelli. And again, I thought held himself really well. And then I thought he was noticeable in the game on Monday. Obviously, no one scored a goal, but there was some promising performances. And I thought Owen Griffin was just fine for a 5'9" fifth-round draft pick, right? He'll be back. Again, I am unsurprised by lots of this, right? The other two guys, they got their preseason game in. Kearsey, I thought was again not remarkable, but fine. A perfectly cromulent preseason game for a guy without an AHL or NHL contract. Seema definitely was a guy. I think he struggled to stand out a little bit more, which is a shame because I thought he had a really good prospect tournament. But he is back to Saginaw for Nicholas Seema. I suspect we might see him again at the end of the season when it is free agent time. I think probably what we'll see is he'll play the last 4 or 5 Monsters games of the season, and if they make the playoffs, he'll go there as well. But like I said, I'm not surprised by any of these cuts, and honestly, there are going to be more coming. I don't think there'll be a ton more soon, but my guess is that the next guys to go, my guess is it's going to be guys like Charlie Ellick is probably the next guy that's going to be cut, and I suspect they'll start sending guys down to Cleveland. I think Charlie Ellick is the last guy that is going to be going back to a CHL club. I believe everyone else that's going to be cut is going to be going down to the Monsters, but I think they wanted to get Ellick one last game in the NHL preseason before sending him down. He played last night, was fine but not outstanding, which is kind of what I expected. So I suspect he'll probably be on the way. And then you'll start getting into, okay, well, we'll send guys like Caleb McDonald to the AHL. We'll send guys like Bjork Holm to the AHL. Guys like Roman Ashan, who played last night. I suspect he's going to be one of the next cuts. Ryland Mosley, Riley Bizot, all of these guys, I think, are probably going to be in the next round of cuts. I know that Everson said that all of the guys were going to get 3 preseason games. I do not know if he meant that everyone was going to get 3 preseason games, or if just the veterans were going to get 3 preseason games and everyone else was going to kind of get games as and when. But that's my guess for who's going to be next. It's definitely going to be Alec, and my guess is probably a couple of the depth monsters will be next. But it's weird because obviously you've had these 4 preseason games in a row. So they started on Sunday, they played Monday, they played last night, and they'll play tonight as well. And then they have 2 days off and then a game, and then 3 days off and then a game, and then 3 days off and then a game. So it's going to get harder to get these guys game action, right? So I'm kind of surprised that we had cuts already. I think I talked about this in yesterday's episode. I was expecting cuts to happen after this kind of stretch of 4 games to try and get everyone 1 or 2 games in this weird beginning of the preseason. But I do wonder if, now that you've had 3 preseason games, I do wonder if we'll see Charlie Alec get sent back to the Tri-City Americans probably about 20 minutes after this episode goes live, because I believe they sent them down. I believe the cuts yesterday were made at 9 a.m. Eastern, which was about an hour after I posted the episode where I talked about how there probably weren't going to be any cuts. So we'll see. like I said, there's no surprises in terms of cuts at this point. It's going to be the guys that it's going to be the CHL guys, and it's going to be the depth AHL guys that are going to go down. That's unsurprising, right? None of that is a shock to anyone. It's just kind of we're playing a little bit of a waiting game now. But I think Charlie Alex had 2 preseason games. I do not think he'll necessarily get a third. He might, but my guess is that as probably anytime in the next hour from you listening to this, Alec is going to be sent back to Tri-City, and that's okay. He knows what he's got to work on now. Hopefully, when we see him this time next year, we are seeing a much more cautious Alec. I think is the best word for it, because at the minute I would not necessarily describe anything in his game as cautious, and I think he could get a little bit more wary of just kind of throwing himself fully into something. But I liked him much better in the preseason than I liked him in the prospect tournament. Like I said, I still think there's decision making to be worked on, but I think that between the prospect tournament and the preseason / training camp, I think probably he's had a sit down with the development team, some training staff, some coaches, and they've probably said, "Hey, look, here's what you need to work on," and we're seeing the beginning of that now. So he'll be fine. He'll be back. But my guess is that he's the next guy to go. That's kind of I've got for today. We'll be back tomorrow. We'll break down the final preseason game of this insane 4-game stretch. Hopefully we'll have some good to talk about. Hopefully the Blue Jackets will pull to 500 in the preseason, and hopefully they'll beat the Penguins. We always love when they beat the Penguins, right? Thank you for listening to this episode, for making it your first listen of the day every single day. Locked On Blue Jackets is free and available on all podcast platforms and over on YouTube. I've been Jay Foster. You can find me on Blue Sky at JAKOBFORSTER. You can find the show at LO_Blue Jackets over on Twitter. And if you have comments, questions, criticisms, you can email me at lockedonbluejackets@gmail.com. Thank you once again for listening. And until tomorrow, make sure you stay locked on.